Welcome to Around the Drafting Table, where we explore the fascinating world of architecture through engaging conversations with Utah's leading experts. I'm architect Kory Cox, your host and guide on this journey. In each episode, we'll delve into the essential topics that shape your vision, from understanding design principles to navigating the construction process. Whether you're dreaming of your first custom home, planning a renovation, or embarking on your mountain getaway project, our discussions will empower you with knowledge and insights. We'll speak with industry experts who will share real-life stories, answer your burning questions, and ensure that you feel confident every step of the way. So grab a seat at the table, and let's start building your dream together. Join us for Around the Drafting Table, where ideas take shape and visions become reality. Welcome to Around the Drafting Table, where we talk about topics that are top of mind for homeowners looking to design a new home. I am Kory Cox, the Oxford architect. Joining us today, we have Utah leading landscape architect Mike Wonenberg of G. Brown Design. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Our topic today is landscape architecture, a critical junction right at the beginning of your project. To begin, can you explain the role of a landscape architect in the context of custom home design?
Yeah, so landscape architect's role really is, any design elements pretty much outside the envelope of a home. So we're involved with site design, laying out paths, parking areas, entertainment spaces, and then obviously planting and irrigation design as well. So
And you work very closely together with the civil engineer as well, right?
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, our civil and landscape architects overlap a little bit. Obviously, we're kind of focused on the kind of the aesthetic aspects of site design.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Why is site analysis crucial before starting the landscape design process?
Yeah, really, it's understanding the site. And so as we kind of start working from kind of the site survey or existing mapping, it's really to try to identify kind of the opportunities and restraints. So we use the site analysis to look at good and bad views,
Mm-hmm.
topography, work with the grade to minimize cut and fill, disturbance. Um, really understanding kind of the best ways to get circulation to the site, whether that's vehicular or pedestrian.
Mm-hmm.
And sun shade exposures to maximize kind of in this climate and hemisphere. We try to maximize exposure to the south, kind of get that winter sun exposure, and then use plantings to kind of screen the wind and sun where you don't want it.
Yep. As a quick follow-up, would you just explain cut and fill and what the goal is there?
Yeah, so the idea is to really minimize the cut and fill. So we're really trying to balance it, the cut and fill on a site. So it minimizes costs, minimizes disturbance to the site. So you're not
Mm-hmm.
having to import or export a bunch of material.
Yeah. And that's moving dirt around, right? So
Correct. Yeah,
ideally you would want to move dirt from one part of your site to another, and so you don't have to bring any into the site.
exactly.
Right. So your cut fill is zero, would be
Yeah.
an ideal
Uh,
situation.
Yep, definitely. And sometimes just depending on soils, sometimes you have to, if they're not quality soils, that's not doesn't always work, but that's the
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that happen, and that can lead to a pretty big cost increase. So it's one of the reasons why it's critical to understand what the soils are on site,
Mhm.
kind of before you start doing anything else. Geotech is one of the first things we do.
Yep, definitely.
What key strategies or design principles do you recommend to achieve a low maintenance and water-wise landscape?
Yeah. I mean, first off, the more you can keep with the local native plant palette, the better.
Hmm.
Obviously, the native plants are adaptive to local, weather conditions and soil conditions and exposures and that. So, once you start breaking away from that, then you usually have to add more fertilizer. There's more just overall maintenance involved, more water. And obviously, Utah's the second driest state in the nation, so
Hmm.
we're always thinking about ways we can reduce water consumption.
Yep, definitely. So on top of that, what maintenance considerations should homeowners keep in mind when planning their landscapes?
Again, keeping with the native, and then proper soil depths and good quality soil. Utah is notorious for not the greatest soils, so
Hmm.
a lot of times we are importing soils that retain moisture, drain well, and just creates that's the foundation basically for plants. So it is an important aspect of just keeping the plants healthy and long-term health of the landscape. So then just quality materials, really for the most part, we kind of look at design as that's usually simpler is better. Not getting
Hmm.
too fussy with the kind of the interfaces between, hardscape, landscape, just keeping things in more masses and having a good edge conditions as far as like mow curves or edging to kind of contain those edges.
Okay. I'm intrigued by what you said there, like keeping things simple. So you're saying that you try and keep like similar plants together so that
Hmm.
watering and maintenance is simpler and just easier to contend with.
Yeah, correct. And then like especially with the native plantings, we get this a lot with like native seed areas to where you don't want to introduce a bunch of broadleaf plants because you can't take a broadleaf herbicide, and so then you're limited to just mechanically removal and unless if a
Hmm.
client or whoever is maintaining the site is committed to that, it can really drive up maintenance. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah,
Some
yeah,
people really enjoy that, but I'm not one to be down
right.
on my knees in the garden pulling weeds on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, and it's kind of staying away from like a lot of hedges or
Hmm.
things that have to be pruned back all the time. Choosing the right size plant material is very important because it's everyone wants a really instant impact, but which looks great the first few years, but then they become overgrown, and then people have to manipulate that to keep the plants to a size that fits the space.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
One of the things that kind of rises to my mind talking about that is one of the things I look for in my early site design are mature trees and other plant features on a site might be protected. Because one of the simple realities is we can build anything we want, right, with enough money,
mhm,
but you can't build a mature tree.
right. Yep.
Can't be done. So if you've got a tree on site that's beautiful and it's mature, it's just worth protecting during construction so you
Yep.
can enjoy that as soon as the home is done because you can come in and you can design this really beautiful thing, and we can plant some trees often 2-inch caliper or whatever they are, but they're going to be pretty young
Yeah.
and they're going to take many years, perhaps even decades to fully mature.
Right. And that kind of reemphasizes that, choosing the right size for the space, because what a person doesn't want is have, a tree that matures for 30 or 40 years and then it becomes crowded. Well, you can't just replace that and get the same impact, right? So
Hmm.
trees are really priceless in a lot of ways because that
Yeah,
time you can't just replace time and the growth of a tree. So
exactly.
yeah, I guess another note on the maintenance side is having a mulch, organic or stone mulch, which kind of holds moisture into the soil and helps mitigate weeds. Because the this more sun exposure to the soil, that's going to just propagate weeds. So it really kind of helps control that, reduces maintenance.
Okay. Next, what irrigation options do you recommend for homeowners looking to create a sustainable landscape while minimizing water usage?
Yeah. So generally, the technology's come a long ways in irrigation components. So really using a smart irrigation controller is probably the number one.
Hmm.
And really what makes a irrigation controller smart isn't just the controller itself, but it's the components that kind of tie in with it. So having a flow sensor. So the flow sensor measures how much water is being run through the system, and then a master valve, and
Okay.
then having communication from the irrigation controller to either a weather station which is probably most common these days, or like a soil moisture sensor. So
Hmm.
once you set the baseline with the controller, it can measure how much is being used, and then so you kind of set a baseline, and then as weather conditions change, then it changes accordingly with the weather conditions. So if it's hot and dry, it kicks it on a little bit more. If it's raining, then it adjusts accordingly. So that's huge in itself.
Okay, so
And
this system has some ability to, does it respond to adaptive weather conditions, or is it like based on a calendar and averages?
you can do it both ways. So you can
Okay.
have it kind of set to a calendar. Those are kind of the lower end. But then some can be active, right on this, real time. So if it's
So does
raining,
that mean that they have to maintain an internet connection to accomplish that, or
yeah.
do they have sensors and they're picking up data from around them?
So the if you're connecting to ET data, which is evaporation transpiration rate,
Hmm.
that's usually communicating through internet line or
Okay.
some sort of comm line to the local weather stations. But you can have it with moisture sensors are just local. So you with a local with moisture sensors, you don't need a communication line.
So I think that's a really interesting system and kind of a smart system to add on top of the irrigation system. But there's something else that we were talking about last week, and that is the difference between like surface irrigation and subsurface irrigation.
Right.
And so what options do homeowners have there, and what are the main benefits of subsurface?
Yeah. So pretty much anytime you're irrigating with above ground sprays, you're putting water into the air and increases evaporation. If it's hot, dry, and windy, it's just evaporate into the air. Where anytime you can get the irrigation directly into the soil
Hmm.
and below grade, which actually you're getting that thermal aspect of where it's not getting hot and getting the water right to the root system where it's needed.
Yeah,
So yeah, another aspect, if you do above ground sprays, which is typically for like lawn areas, we usually go with a lower precipitation rate. And there's rotary nozzles that and then pressure reducers within the heads that because a lot of times systems run with too much pressure, and then you get that fine misting, which just ends up increasing your evaporation rate. Where if you get those droplets
hmm,
thicker and larger, it's more is going to be hitting the ground. I've heard data that just having pressure reducing heads alone, pressure regulated heads can save 30% of water just that alone. So
that's pretty impressive.
it is impressive, yeah. And then we usually have check valves in the lines. So then every time the system is cycled on and off, you're not draining to the low points. So it
Hmm.
holds water in there. So you're not losing water that way as well.
Great. Another part of our earlier conversation had to do with encouraging those root systems to drive deeper.
Yep.
And that makes the plants more resilient, right? And then how do you accomplish that?
Yeah. And that becomes more of an operational exercise. So the idea is once you plant your plants is to, during establishment, you have to water shallow while the roots are still, used to a container.
Hmm.
And then as they start to establish and grow outward, is that you water less frequency, but then deeper. So then you're driving that moisture level in the soil down further, encouraging deep root growth. And so over time, then when you get a drought, the roots have driven down deeper where it's going to evaporate less.
Hmm.
And so it'll handle those hot, dry periods better. If you just sh irrigate shallow, then it's just harder on the plants when things change as far as precipitation.
Yeah. And I know that resiliency is a major topic of conversation around landscape and many other things.
Right.
Okay, so earlier you mentioned native and adaptive planting. What's the difference between those two, and where is adaptive planting more appropriate than native?
Yeah. So native is really obviously whatever's local that's been growing in before man moved in and started to develop. And so those plants obviously are well suited for the environment and soil conditions, like I mentioned
Hmm.
earlier. But but not all homeowners are wanting sagebrush and rabbit brush and native grasses. They want something more ornamental that has more, color, and keeping, different, shrub and perennial heights to kind of fits the layering aspect in the landscape. So
Hmm.
the native, you're somewhat limited in what you can do. And now with these nurseries coming up with all sorts of hybrids, they've bred these different plants, and a lot of times they start out with a native genus, and
Okay.
they've bred them to like keeping like more compact habits, longer bloom times, more, sturdy branching structure, and it just benefits. You can achieve more in the landscape aesthetically, and so it opens up a larger plant palette that a designer can work with.
Okay.
And some are bred for more disease resistant and seedless, and there's all sorts of things that they've been bred to just improve their um, kind of overall look in the landscape, so, and health.
Okay. So as we talk about that, something that's coming to mind for me is you have a design process that you go
Correct.
through with each and every owner. What is the ideal time for you to get involved on the project? And then, what does the cadence of interaction kind of look like as you guide your clients through the design process?
Yeah. I mean, we really prefer to be engaged as soon as a site or a lot is purchased, if it's a new build,
Okay.
because again, talking about the site inventory and analysis, you know, we can get engaged when an architect's getting, being engaged, and we can help site the home. It's again kind of talking about exposures and views to maximize kind of where we want sun, where we don't want sun,
Hmm.
and we've definitely run into issues where a client will engage us late, and then once you start that process, you just increase your kind of constraints, right? So if you have kind of that blank slate, you can do more and work the design to kind of fit the site and kind of maximize the opportunities.
Okay. So you're saying like right up front, you're going to be part of the team that's helping to pick the location of the home on the site
Yeah,
and
yep,
then
that's
potentially the orientation and all that kind of thing.
yep. And unfortunately, we don't. We wished we were engaged earlier in kind of that whole process, but a lot of
Hmm.
times, by the time we're engaged, it's the home's already sited,
Yep.
and and then some cases the homeowner is already doing some things, and then you're just
You're a bit
it just
stuck.
get pinned in a corner a little bit sometimes.
Okay. How can homeowners budget effectively for landscaping in conjunction with their home design?
Um, Again, kind of going back to what I just said, is getting engaged earlier. But I think the biggest thing with all that is to have a master plan, really
Hmm.
starting out with that plan. Even though that the client might not have um, a budget to do everything at once, the master plan is becomes sort of that foundation early exercise where you get kind of the program elements, everything they want as far as outdoor entertainment spaces, and we really encourage them to think a little bit bigger long term, and then we can kind of establish like phasing. So then they can, maybe they don't have a budget to do everything at once, but then they can kind of work towards that,
Hmm.
and then do it in a way to where you're not creating a bunch of rework. So kind of working backwards from the lot to where you might not have access, and then kind of work towards where you have access, so then they could come in and easily add in additional improvements later.
Yeah.
And then
Um,
and
Go
then I
ahead.
guess just really having a contingency in place too. There's always in any building construction project, there's always
Hmm.
unknowns, and I really plan for that contingency, a contingency. So doesn't increase everyone's stresses when things start to creep.
Yeah, a point that I often make to people is every home that we build is a prototype,
Yeah.
right? It's always the first time that we're doing it. Even though everyone on the team has built many homes and has vast experience, when you're designing a car, they build a prototype and they make a bunch of mistakes, and all those mistakes cost money.
Hmm.
But then they go and they build 100,000 of them.
Hmm.
We don't have that luxury, right?
Hmm.
So we do everything that we can to minimize those mistakes, but every project is going to have errors creep in, or mistakes or unknown conditions. I was working on a hospital project a number of years ago, and they were digging for one of the foundations and discovered a foundation of an old building,
Hmm.
that had been torn down. It was part of the hospital previously. And that team just decided that rather than tear all that stuff out, they were just going to leave it in the ground and bury it. A surprise for us to find later. So that cost a significant amount of money because we then had to take all that out.
Hmm.
So contingency is very important. I agree with you.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing too is that timing. The more a client can think ahead
Hmm.
and engage the design team, and because sometimes they get in a hurry and then it's like, okay, we want this built by this certain time, and then it really it's if we have time to kind of work it into our schedule, typically our fees are more competitive, and if it needs to be done in a rush, our fees go up accordingly to compensate for that. So
Right.
and that goes with bidding out for construction as well, as you know.
There's a topic here that I definitely want to get to, so I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. And that is WUI.
Yeah.
What is WUI and why do owners need to be aware of it?
Yeah, so it stands for Wildland Urban Interface. And so we're living in an area, especially, the Wasatch Front foothills area, where any home that's abutting against, it doesn't necessarily have to be like public land or wild, native, but anything that's vegetated that would carry would be a fire risk.
Hmm.
So it's really kind of mitigating the dangers of lowering combustible materials, creating defensible spaces to if there is a wildland fire that comes through, that gives you a good chance of not losing all the investment put into the project. So obviously,
Yeah.
so
I think we all remember the fire in Lahaina, Hawaii,
yeah, right.
just last year or the year before. I'm forgetting exactly when that happened now, but
Yeah.
there's that very famous image of the single home that survived. And I've seen a number of articles talking about how, they weren't necessarily following WUI code, but they were using some of the same strategies. And that defensible space around the home is one of the things credited with saving it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, roofing materials is probably one of the biggest things, and then not having combustible materials right at the ground plane where, as a fire carries through, that it doesn't create a kind of what we call kind of ladder of combustibles to reach the facade of the home.
Hmm. So we've already talked a little bit about what some of the requirements for WUI are, but let's dive into it a little bit deeper. So we've been talking about defensible space. What is defensible space and how do we create it and later maintain it?
Yeah, so defensible space is, so the code really calls out, so 30 feet beyond the home is kind of is this kind of the minimum standard. And
Hmm.
so what that is really is that area is that you thin the ground fuels. You can have trees in there. They recommend pruning them up to 8 feet. Um, and then 10 feet from the home, not having any tree canopy. So really
Okay.
kind of that ladder fuel. So as a fire comes through, a lot of times the heavier vegetation, like, deciduous trees, they're dense enough that they're not really going to catch. It's the grasses and the shrubs that will create that fuel underneath is basically a kindling for the trees. So it's really thinning
Hmm.
that, wood piles, down trees, and just thick brush, really.
Yeah. So I know that there are some trees that are actually quite resilient to a forest fire, things like redwoods. We don't have those here.
Hmm.
But I know that there are redwoods that have lasted many hundreds of years and gone through a number of fires. Do we have any native species of tree that are more fire resilient?
Yeah, so I really consider an aspen as one of
Hmm.
those, is that just the makeup that they just don't tend to, you know, they're not like a pine. Like pines, anything with like a sap, needle, obviously that those are going to be higher risk.
Hmm.
But the aspens really, you might burn the leaves off, but it's not going to carry a fire. It's not going to create the intense heat that's going to really start things on fire on the side of the home.
Yeah, because the sap in the evergreen trees, it's essentially a fuel, isn't it?
Right, yeah, it's like
It's like an oil.
gasoline. Yeah, if you see
Yeah.
if you ever thrown a Christmas tree on a fire, you know real quick that they burn very well. So
Yeah, it reminds me of a time in college. We gathered like 100 Christmas trees, took it out to some undisclosed location, and lit them all on fire in a big pile.
yeah, yeah,
It was a great time.
yeah,
I've never seen anything burn so hot and so fast.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't take much. They are
Hmm.
so yeah, and then that 30-foot defensible space is really kind of an area too where in a wildland fire event, fire crews can work their way around, drag hoses or whatever to protect the structure.
Hmm.
And we typically always advocate homeowners of putting an irrigation system, even though it's not as native and they don't necessarily need a long-term irrigation system to keep the plants alive. It's
Hmm.
always a kind of a extra assurance that if something comes through, they can turn it on and wet down to help mitigate that. So
Okay. We're running a little bit short on time here. Or is there anything else that you'd like to share with people listening in today about working with the landscape architect?
I think it's important as you hire design professionals is it's like with anything, if you're going to hire a doctor and that, I mean, we always want to incorporate the client and the homeowner's, decisions and their wishes, but really
Hmm.
trying to keep an open dialogue, to where they're to kind of eliminate the absolutes and be like, well, they don't like something. Let's talk that through a little bit and understand kind of why they don't like it,
Hmm.
and kind of work through, because sometimes, you know, we have homeowners that are just like, well, I don't like this, but let's talk about the reasons why, because there might be some benefits, pluses and negatives to things we propose. So it's just kind of keeping that open dialogue back and forth and kind of treat the client as a team member, right?
Right.
So
Okay. Well, that is our time. Mike, thank you for joining the conversation around the drafting table today to provide your thoughts on site selection. And until next time, get in touch with the Oxford Architect so we can dream together.
I'm good. Appreciate it, Kory. Thanks for having me.